the other point you make, which you come to after that bit of the book, is that you say people need to, I think you said, well, you said it varies, to look after themselves better, to care for themselves and be gentle with themselves. And you say people just don't. Tell us what you mean by that. Because you're not talking about buying yourself another packet of biscuits.
I'll tell you, I had somebody ask me a brilliant question today. I was doing a podcast, and I'm going to reframe your question if you don't mind, because this question today really struck me and it made me stop. And the question the podcaster asked me was, she said, if you were doing Glastonbury, if Glastonbury asked you to come next year and give one piece of advice to everyone there about their mental well-being, what would that be? She said, but you've only got you've only got a minute or something. They're not going to be a full game. They're just giving you a minute. You've just got to go into Glastonbury stage. You've got a huge audience, and said, like, one thing, one takeaway. And I had to stop and think about it. But then immediately the answer came, and it came back to looking after yourself. And I think what I mean by that is most people, and I say this every day when I'm talking about this work, but most people treat themselves appallingly. They really do. And I don't mean by, they're not buying themselves enough new clothes, or they're not having enough holidays. I'm not talking about the practical stuff. I'm talking about the internal narrative. That critical voice, you idiot. You're not good enough. Look at you. You look like a fool. You sound stupid. Look at you. You're too big. You're too small. You're not pretty enough. These narratives that we play out every day in our head, and that we start to collude with, and then we start to self-attack and self-sabotage. I think for me, freedom comes when people realize that they're doing that to themselves on a regular basis, and they're not treating themselves well. That for me is, because look, I think you can go and see any therapist, and you can try every technique in the land. You can go off on a retreat, you can book into Prairie for a month, do whatever you want. But if you are not treating yourself well, and you're not looking after yourself, and you're not talking to yourself as someone who matters.
Yeah, you use that phrase beautifully in the book several times.
You have to, it's about genuinely treating yourself as someone who matters. And if you don't feel that you're someone who matters, then you need to work out why that is, because you do matter. And I think the moment you start to treat yourself as someone who matters, then life changes really drastically, because then you don't compromise in the self-care stuff. It's like, no. I mean, look, people we care about in our own lives, we wouldn't say to them, you idiot. We wouldn't criticize them. We wouldn't be harsh to them. We wouldn't neglect them, or we wouldn't say, no, you're not going to have a break today. Just keep working and burn yourself into the ground. No, don't talk about those feelings. I'm not interested. We just wouldn't treat people like that, because we care for them. We think, no, I want to look after you. I want to look out for you. I want to support you. Why on earth wouldn't we do that to ourselves?
Why? Why do people end up like that?
Well, exactly, because I think it's like...
No, I'm asking you a question.
No, I'm going to answer it as well, because I think it's we're taught, many of us in our cultures, and that's often, it can be cultural to where we live in our countries, the British stiff upper lip, similar in Ireland, just get on with it. I think it can be part of religions and cultural influences, where it's always deemed that to suffer is okay, and we should carry all of these burdens. So I think there are a number of influences around it, but actually, and I think there has been a belief for a long period of time that all of this, self-care nonsense that I hear people, they say, oh God, all this wishy-washy, woo-woo self-care stuff. It's all a bit, when I brace this with a client, and I often really get quite entertained when I say to your client, have you thought about self-care? And they'll kind of look at me really cynically and like, what is this guy what's this guy on? What's this self-care stuff? I mean, this is all getting a bit weird. I mean, you start to break it down, and you kind of think, do you realize that you're neglecting yourself? Do you realize you're sabotaging yourself? And I think often we're programmed to believe that to care for ourselves is quite selfish and self-indulgent. I think that's one of the biggest, it's one of the most disastrous lies that we're told, actually, because when we learn to look after ourselves, then not only do we deliver the best of who we are, but I think other people get the best from us. And I think all of the research is really clear. Look, when you've got a mind that's functioning well, you're going to cope better. You're going to perform better. You're going to be more creative. You're going to achieve more. So actually, there's nothing selfish or indulgent about this here. Actually, you just get more from your life. So that's what I mean when I talk about looking after yourself. It's much more significant than just go and buy yourself a cappuccino.
Yes. Can I begin to ask you a couple of questions from because we've got quite a lot of questions have come in. Is that right? I'll ask you some questions.
Of course, absolutely. Yeah, the more the merrier, please.
Anne Reed says, if we tell our Facebook lives even to ourselves, how do we get to the truth?
Well, I think most of us know what the truth is for us. I mean, fundamentally, every human being knows the truth of their story. And I think if you know it's a Facebook story, then you know it's not the truth. You know it's a lie. So what I'd say to Jan is the fact that you know it's a Facebook story, it's about creating the time and space to ask, okay, this is a version I deliver because it's comfortable and it's what I know. What I would say the next step is to step back from that and say, okay, what is the truth of my story? In the book, there's a section that's not just about telling your story. I ask people to map out a timeline, and I encourage them to take time and space out to do like almost a review of their life, go over the story. And I get them to do that in like a movie trailer way, where we get the key points, the highs and the lows, the rich moments, the poor moments, the kind of the full tapestry of the story. And what I'd say is, if you feel like you're in a rehearsed story, well then step out.
Yeah.
And create the time and space and ask yourself, okay, what is the truth of my story? And not to be frightened of it. We run away. I mean, literally, I was talking to someone recently and they're an ultra marathon runner. And they do all of these huge events, Ironman, ultra marathons, they do all this stuff. And he said, beautifully the way he described it to me, and he said, I did all this stuff for years. And one thing I didn't realize was that I was actually running from myself. I was running from my own story. Right. And I think, that's what we tend to do. And I think don't run, because there's nothing that there's nothing there that's going to damage you. It's your story. It's okay. It might be difficult, but it doesn't mean that you run from it.
Anne followed up with an exclamation mark at the end. She said, "And what's wrong with another packet of biscuits?"
Only Anne can answer that one.
True. Back to you, Anne. Jane Bott says, historically, some therapists or sessions would see clients for 8 to 10 sessions. Is this still helpful? How long should we see a therapist or work with one?
I mean, it's a huge question. I personally, and this is very much a personal belief, I tend not to work with clients for extended longer periods of time. And by that, I mean several years, or, I'm not an analyst. So an analyst could be with a client for 10, 20 years. I tend to work in much more focused ways. Now, there's an argument that for some people, will 6 sessions be enough? In my experience, by and large, no. Will 10 sessions be enough for some people? Depending on the story and the context, it could be that it's enough as a block of work to help somebody work through a difficulty. It could be an anxiety problem. It could be a mood issue. It could be bereavement, loss. If somebody's got more significant trauma, they may need longer. But I think from my experience therapeutically, and this is a very much a personal opinion in this here, because I work in time limited sessions when I'm with people, what I've discovered is that they work harder. So if I say to someone, okay, well, look, we're going to do a block of 10 sessions and we are going to focus on your anxiety, for example, or we're going to focus on the difficulties in your relationship or your anger, whatever the context may be. If I keep that open-ended, it can be that people just come and people think that therapy is just a chat. There's this illusion that people just come along. You're going to have a nice chat to the therapist every week and go back to Anne's biscuits, have a nice cup of tea and a biscuit.
It's the English answer to everything.
Whereas actually therapy is a whole series. It's not just about talking. Therapy is about learning to change patterns of thinking. It's learning to change how you manage emotions. It's learning to regulate decisions that you make in your life. It's about boundaries. It's about who you surround yourself with. It's about the choices that you make in your life. So good therapy is a complete overhaul of your life. So depending on the context of the story and the work that needs to be done, for some people, shorter term can work fine. For other people, they may need longer. But I also believe that everyone has the capacity, hence the title of this book, How to Be Your Own Therapist. I believe that everyone has the capacity to be their own therapist. They have the wisdom and the insight within them. The therapist job, that no therapist in the land will save you or make it all better. That's a fallacy. So, forget about that one. But what good therapy will do is it will help awaken stuff, and it will help point you in directions that enable you to move forward. So it's a big question, and I could probably talk about this for a long time, but I don't think people should be in therapy for extended long periods, because I worry that it can create a dependency that sometimes might be unhelpful.
Someone called Tapawa says, how is anger managed in therapy? Sort of significant anger, like the loss of your life's earnings, or divorce, or the loss of a family home. I mean, in other words, big things.
It's a great question, and it's like everything we deal with in life or in therapy. I mean, we work with what is, and of course, what you're never going to do is you're never going to minimize the impact of what has happened to someone, whether it's a loss or something devastating. But I guess what we know is that, whatever happens in life, the reality is at some point, the recovery and the rebuilding and the beginning to re-engage with life is ultimately about how you manage the event. So we'll spend time dealing with the awfulness and the pain and the heartache and the upset and all of that, because you can't minimize that. But there comes a point, it's also about, okay, how do we now build on this? How do we reconnect? How do we reclaim? What would help? Because, like as I was saying earlier, if something terrible happens and you get stuck in a state of, this is awful, this is terrible, my life is over. That's on top of the awful thing that's happened, that's an awful way to live, because then you become disempowered and you become stuck. And I guess good therapy is, okay, it is terrible and it's awful. And it's, it's really sad that you've had to endure that, but actually you have a choice in how you manage this. Yeah. And there are ways of managing this here that may be more helpful for you and may help you reclaim some sort of hope again. So, you probably know from the book, I talk a lot about hope also, and the importance of hope. And I think sometimes there's a danger in therapy that introducing hope can be seen as disrespectful, particularly if it's around loss or bereavement. It can be seen as, particularly with big losses in the early days of loss, it's kind of almost a very sacred area that people want to feel that pain, and understandably so. The pain, the heartache, the devastation is all part of a process. And to go in too early with hope can feel disrespectful. But it's about timing and knowing at what point, when you watch somebody really suffer and that it's going to really significantly inhibit their life, then there comes a point when the introduction of hope becomes important.
Yes.
We're not born to suffer.
No, I should hope not.